So far in superhero timelines, we've covered some of the more obscure superheroes like Batman and Superman, but now it's time to go with one of the most well-known superheroes of all time. We're going to talk about Troma's The Toxic Avenger, and also Sergeant Kabukiman NYPD. Let's find out how the continuity holds up and if it's super. So everything great in the world began in 1984 with The Toxic Avenger, and we head to Tromaville's gym to meet Melvin Ferd, Mop Boy, and his bullies Bozo, Slug, Julie, and Wanda. They're not only bullies, but they also run over watermelons. I mean, kids on bike. And worse, they trick Melvin into making out with a sheep. The poor guy gets so ashamed that he jumps out of a window directly into a barrel of toxic waste that's parked below, which certainly doesn't seem too safe. Of course, instead of just killing him, the waste transforms him into a hideously deformed creature of superhuman size and strength. He becomes the Toxic Avenger. He makes his debut by horribly mangling a few criminals, although one named Cigar Face escapes. We find out that the mayor and chief of police are corrupt, while Toxie takes up residence in the local dump, and then rescues a blind girl named Sarah by killing some guys robbing a taco restaurant, which is a clearly well thought out criminal plan. The newspaper that features a story on it gives us our date, though, with the year being 1983, although it's a little hard to read here. We find out that Toxie has a basic instinct to seek out and destroy evil, which he then does in the most violent ways possible, and more newspapers confirm the 1983 date, and then he finally does get Cigar Face, and also starts dating Sarah. Oh, and also he gets revenge on the bullies, which obviously upsets Marissa Tomei. I think this is before she won the Oscar. After killing Slug and Bozo, he seemingly goes off the deep end and kills a little old lady. She's not so sweet, though, as it's revealed that she's the head of a slavery ring, but the police go after Toxie anyway, although the townspeople intervene, allowing him to finally kill the evil mayor, clear his name, and win back the love of his mother, promising to protect Tromaville from all evil. 5 years later, in 1989, Toxie came back in Toxic Avenger Part 2, in which he kicks off by telling us that his name is now Melvin Junko for some reason. He also says that several years ago he defeated evil in Tromaville, so we're at least a few years after the first one, and the town is now a much happier looking place. His mom is here, and so is his girlfriend, who is now named Claire. She's also blind, so it's most likely she's supposed to be the same girl, although with Melvin's different name, Sarah's new name, the Toxic Avenger's new voice, it's possible that this is an alternate continuity to the first one and a different universe, especially in the later films when alternate realities are introduced. So when an evil corporation blows up the Center for the Blind, Toxie fights them all, including Black Dynamite. And these guys who manage to shoot each other to death without leaving any bullet holes, which is kind of amazing. And at the Apocalypse Incorporated board meeting, it looks like Cigar Face is back to life, or someone who looks just like him, and the late Joe Fleischaker appears, and we find out that the chemicals that make Toxie seek out evil are called Tromatons, which is only slightly less of a weird name as midichlorians. When our hero finds out that his long-lost father is in Japan, he goes there and deals out justice, while Apocalypse Inc. takes over Tromaville, pissing off the people of Tromaville, including this citizen, who earlier was shown at one of the evil corporate people. They protest, and we see that it's May at least, but no year as of yet, and when Toxie finds his dad, his Tromatons let him know that he's actually evil. He starts to fight him and is surprised by what he calls Kabukiman, Foreshadow, who he kills with a saw that is very clearly not on. Toxie then fights his dad, who almost kills him with anti-Tromaton until his pop is accidentally chopped up into sushi. Melvin is healed by the power of sumo, and he heads home to drive Apocalypse out of town, just in time for what turns out to be Melvin's real dad to show up. So here's the story here. Apparently Lloyd shot so much footage, the original cut of the film was well over 3 hours long, so they changed some things around and made it into 2 films, guaranteeing a Toxic Avenger Part 3. And we didn't have to wait long, since later that same year saw the release of the Toxic Avenger Part 3, The Last Temptation of Toxie. It starts off by flashing back to the first movie and says that it was in 1984, so I guess those newspapers were wrong or whatever, but it still calls Melvin Junko and shows the papers that said 1983, and then says the events of Part 2 took place in 1988. Sarah is still Claire as well, and when she gets word of an expensive treatment to restore her sight, Toxie freaks out and hallucinates Melvin, or, this guy. this guy. Even though the flashbacks to the first movie showed the original Melvin, so go figure. We then see more Apocalypse Inc., but it's actually the same footage that we've already seen in the last film, including Cigar Face again, so I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a flashback, but when they offer Toxie a job, he seems to have never heard of them, even though he knew all about them in the last one. So here's the thing. Since this film is half footage from the last one, and the two films were originally one long film that they split into two, it looks like they split the plot, which unfortunately creates logic and continuity errors, which definitely screws up with the timeline. I mean, in the second film, Apocalypse Inc. takes over the whole town, and when Toxie comes back from Japan, he has to drive them out. So there's no reason why he wouldn't know who they were. Even if you think about rearranging the editing so that you think that Toxie went off to Japan, and all the Tromaville scenes weren't supposed to happen, since all those events were originally to take place after he got back and sold out to Apocalypse, and the whole takeover of the town wasn't because Melvin was absent, but because he was working for them, you still have to consider that the very first thing that they did when they arrived in town was blow up the school for the blind. And Toxie saw the signs with the company name on them. So he knew where they were, and that they were evil enough to blow people up. So him not knowing who they are really makes no sense. Troma. So Toxie goes to work for them, and his mom shows up, and his dad is no longer around because in the original footage he hadn't shown up yet. And Apocalypse takes over the town again, except not again, just split up. They restore Claire's sight, but Toxie is swayed by the evil corporation, although he soon sees the error of his ways and fights back. The chairman is revealed to be the devil, and Toxie must face a series of challenges, killing the female villain sidekick, until he's then melted and turned back into Melvin, or this guy. The devil then takes away Claire's vision, and seriously, Melvin is rescued by God, who makes it rain, which restores Claire's sight, and the Toxic Avenger, who then kills the devil and gets married and lives happily ever after. So because of the whole editing thing, it's likely this film is supposed to take place right after the last one, or at the same time, or whatever, but given that it's supposed to take place afterwards, and Toxie has no memory of the Apocalypse Corporation, I guess we're assuming that some time has taken place, although considering that they felt the need to state what year the last one took place, that seems to insinuate that this one is in a different year, so let's go with 1 year later, in 1989. In a slightly different direction, 1 year later, in 1990, we saw the release of Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, further expanding the Troma Hero roster. It starts with introducing Officer Harry Griswold, who walks down a New York street, past a movie theater, showing Look Who's Talking and Communion. Both films came out in 1989, giving us a date for this one. While attending a kabuki performance, a killer opens fire on the cast, and one of the cast members passes his ancient kabuki powers into Harry. Our standard Troma corporate villain shows up, and so does Joe Fleischaker, and then the kabuki guy's granddaughter shows up to warn Harry that the evil one is coming, and he is now the bearer of the Kabuki Man powers. The powers finally manifest, and Harry's transformed into Sergeant Kabuki Man NYPD, who shoots chopsticks, kills people, and then occasionally accidentally transforms into a clown. We then get the origin of the most infamous Troma scene of all time, the car flip. He learns to master his power and cleans up the streets, violently. I mean, he kills a hooker and pimp by chopping him up with a sword, which seems a little bit of overkill. I mean, yes, she does hold out money on the pimp, so he hits her and drags her off. So she pulls a knife to defend herself, and for this, Kabuki Man deems her worthy of being chopped up with the pimp. Nice one, Harry. Turns out he can fly with the help of some pretty obvious wires, and finally the villain kidnaps Lotus, and Harry goes for a big face-off. He's too late though, and the prophecy comes true, and the evil one is born. And the evil one has a larval penis, and French-kissing Hitlers for hands. Because Lloyd. Kabuki Man defeats him and continues his fight against evil. The Toxic Avenger then vanished for 11 years and didn't return until 2000's Citizen Toxie, the Toxic Avenger 4, and kicks off with Stan Lee himself narrating, and he says that Melvin transformed 15 years ago and then apologizes for parts 2 and 3 and says that this is the real sequel. Now, assuming that at least the date given in part 3 still matters, this is set 15 years after the first, which they say was set in 1984, so this is 1999. We start with a school hostage standoff, and hey, it's Cigarface again. And Lemmy. And Ron Jeremy and Al Goldstein, and then this bikini-clad reporter turns out to be Toxie in disguise. who now has Joe Flyshaker as a sidekick named Lardass. They take out the villains, and Toxie has his original voice back. Toxie's girlfriend is named Sarah again, and Kabuki Man shows up drinking and trying to molest a reporter, so things haven't been going too well for him apparently. Lardass blows up, and the explosion sends Toxie to an alternate universe where he's wanted by police and Kabuki Man is an evil drug dealer. Meanwhile, in his place, an evil version of himself appears, killing tons of people. Right before... Jesus, is that Eli Roth? Don't ruin this one, Eli. Don't do it. Anyway, the car flip is repeated, and then James Gunn shows up to discuss alternate realities, and this is a long way away from a talking tree and raccoon. He explains that there's Tromaville and Amortville, and that Toxie's evil counterpart is called the Noxious Offender, and then Toxie finds out that Sarah is pregnant, and Mayor Ron brings in a couple of superheroes to take down Noxie. Meanwhile, Toxie teams up with 2 mentally handicapped students, a talking severed head, and the alternate Lardass, and the alternate Sarah, whose name is Claire, but she's deaf instead of blind, and married to Lardass. Noxie kills Ron, and then all the heroes, and Corey Feldman shows up to tell Sarah that she's pregnant with 2 babies because Noxie raped her and one of the babies is his. Toxie uses the Dorothy method to get home, but meets God along the way, who appears to be Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf. Toxie faces off against Noxie's Nazi horde, killing Cigar Face, or Sergeant Kaczynski, and then fighting Noxie and his double-sided mop while their child fetuses fight it out inside Sarah. Toxie's kid wins, and then Toxie tears himself apart, and then Melvin appears. That's right, the actual Melvin, and not that guy. Toxie throws Melvin out a window, but there's toxic waste there, and I guess that sets it up for a sequel. And then Sarah gives birth, and everyone pretty much lives happily ever after. They did promise a next part to it, but we've yet to see it. Toxie also branched out into other forms of media. He had a actually very short-lived cartoon series for kids called the Toxic Crusaders, which even had its own toy lines, very similar to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He also had a pretty cool Marvel comic back in the day, plus some independent comics also. Believe it or not, there's also an official probably off-Broadway musical version as well that was produced by Troma. I've yet to actually see the full production itself. There is no real full-featured video version of it, but there is the full-length soundtrack available online and Spotify and iTunes and such. So there you have it, 5 movies that are kind of a mess in terms of continuity and dates. I'd like to think that the second and third movie did take place in an alternate universe, much like Amortville and Tromaville, and that they kind of exist on their own because they're not really fitting with the Troma spirit, actually, in the long run of things. When they apologized for those sequels, they deserved to. So I have really enjoyable films. I recommend watching them. I'm a huge fan of the original Toxic Avenger, and I love Sergeant Kabuki Man. Would love to see more. Looking to see more in the future, so check it out there. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think down below. Let me know what other superheroes you want to see. Let me know what questions you have. I will always answer questions, no matter what the questions are, no matter how ridiculous they may be. In the meantime, also, please check out my Patreon page. Help support this channel. These fine people over here, they do support the channel, so I want to say thank you to every single one of them. And in the meantime, I'll see you next couple of weeks for another great video. I don't know what I was going to say there, but another great video.